next is going to be Norm Semanko. He is an attorney that we have used in Bonner County frequently. The disclaimer is he's not going to be able to address a legal case in this venue. Though what his specialty has been for our area is water. So I asked him to kind of give a discussion with our group because it's not a never-ending resource, but it is one that in our particular area we have a lot of concern about. He is the go-to attorney with respect to water in North Idaho. So without ado, thank you for coming, and here's Norm.
Thank you, Aisha. So my name is Norm Semanko, and for those that do want to talk about whatever, I'll be here till 2:15-ish. Even after we break up, I'll be here. I've got a meeting in Spirit Lake at 2:30 with some of you, but so I am an attorney, but more importantly, I'm a proud graduate, 1978, from Spirit Lake Elementary. My friend Mike Healy and I rode our bicycles, no hands, down the hill from Spirit Lake to Blanchard. That's pretty much all I know about Blanchard, is that I rode my bike there when I was a kid, because it was in the other county, and the kids in Priest River were weird, and we battled with them twice a year, every year to figure out who was the worst boys basketball team in the state of Idaho between Lakeland and Priest River. So, couple things that I'm not going to talk about, but if you want to talk about with me afterwards, I'm happy to talk to you. One is what Heather mentioned about the Priest Lake legislation, which was all about not allowing the Idaho Department of Fish and Game to use off-budget money to put a siphon in the lake. Successful legislation by her and Senator Herndon. Happy to talk about that if folks want to talk about it. The second thing I want to talk about is the adjudication to the south of here, the Coeur d'Alene, Spokane River Basin adjudication that's still going on, and in particular the hundreds of federal claims to our water that still need to be resolved down there. What I am going to talk about is the adjudication here that we've been talking about in one form or another for at least 15 years, the Clark Fork Ponderay Basin adjudication. So how many of you have filed claims in the adjudication? All right. How many of you have wells and have not filed claims in adjudication? Not very many. So I don't need to go into that spiel. Yeah.
Is adjudication the same as water rights?
Yeah. So the adjudication is a process which has happened throughout almost all of the state by now. There are 98 numbered hydrologic basins in the state. The two up here are 96 and 97. That's the Clark Fork Ponderay Basin adjudication. So everybody who has a water right that has historically used water for 100 years, who's had a permit from the Department of Water Resources for the last 10 years to actually use water. So don't get confused with, I've got a stream going through my property and I might want to use that someday, I'm going to claim a water right. No, that's a permit for a new water right. You need to go see the Department of Water Resources. But for established water rights, you file claims in this adjudication, yeah.
So, like on my property, I have a well and I also have a cistern that is actually fed by a stream. So when I went to file for my water rights, I filed for both. And they, of course, questioned my cistern, but the cistern was actually plumbed into the house back in 1964. So we were still able to get our rights back on that one.
So
Yeah,
if we're on a spring house, instead of a well, is it the same thing as being on a well?
Yeah, so if you've been using the spring since at least 1971, or you have a permit or a license for that, then you have an established water right. And yes, you want to file a claim, whether it's surface water or groundwater, you want to file a claim in the adjudication. If your right's newer than that, or you don't have a piece of paper that shows that you have a water right, you really need to talk to the Department of Water Resources about getting a water right. And the good news is you're in North Idaho. This isn't Southern Idaho. You can still get water rights granted. Priority date matters, and I don't want to go into a long discussion about that in terms of how old your water right is, but it's not as important, particularly if you're not at least back to 1977 with groundwater. So, how many people have been here since 1978? Wow, few. So, when I rode my bike, no hands, there was no traffic on Highway 41. It was paved, but there wasn't much traffic back then. All right, so in this adjudication, everybody files their claims. The deadline's pretty much all come and gone. You can still file claims if you want to late. It's not hard to file a late claim. The Department of Water Resources will investigate all these claims. They'll start issuing what are called director's reports or recommendations to the court. They're going to get a hold of all of you before they do that and say, here's what we think your water right looks like. What do you think? And they're happy to talk to you. Department of Water Resources is not the most difficult government agency to deal with. And then eventually it will be reported to the court, to the adjudication court, which just happens to be headquartered in Twin Falls, but the case is, in Bonner County. If you have no problems with that, it's going to get decreed and you're going to get a piece of paper in the mail. Not unlike the deed to your property, you're going to have a piece of paper, a decree from a court that says this is your water right. It's kind of nice to have that to be able to show you have a water right. Okay? That's what's going to happen with the vast majority of these. You're not going to see these reports coming out till, they say 2024. I think it's going to be more like 2025 in Basin 97, which is Priest River, Priest Lake side of things. If you're over in Basin 96, you may not see anything until as late as 2030. It just takes time to go through this whole process. What I really want to mention as I wrap up is, embedded in all of this is a requirement that if the federal government thinks it has claims to water in this area, they have to file claims. Thankfully, there are only 24 claims filed by the federal government. They were due March 3rd of this year. 15 of them are BLM claims for things you'd expect, like stock water on stock watering reserves and cabin sites on Priest Lake, basically. Those aren't really of much concern. Then there are 9 that have been filed by the Forest Service. And of those, there are a couple that are for basically the entire flow of the basin in undefined areas for undefined purposes. And we've seen these in other parts of the state. And eventually, the state will object to those. Local water users who are concerned, local folks who know about this, will object, and it will be sorted out. But there are other parts of the state where large federal claims have been filed that very much threaten the communities. And these are not things that they had to go into the department and file a claim for. These are things that under federal law, there's a legal doctrine that allows them to file a claim and say, wherever there's federal land was set aside for a specific purpose, in this case, parts of the Panhandle National Forest, where that was done, Congress meant for a certain amount of water to be reserved, carved out of the system for that purpose. It could be an Indian reservation, it could be a forest reserve, it can be all kinds of things. So folks will start diving into that. People will start figuring out if, for example, could these claims have an impact on Priest Lake or on Lake Pend Oreille, the governor's water right for both of those lakes. It's meant to preserve those lakes in place for all the people of the state of Idaho. If you have a senior right downstream of those lakes that commands water to come out of the lake, that would be a concern. So stay tuned for that. We'll see how that goes. I think Attorney General Labrador is pretty on top of this and will make sure that the state files objections to those federal claims, and then there will be those of us that have been watching this for a while who will participate in that process too. That's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. Again, I will be here to answer questions if people have issues, specific ones in particular that not everybody else wants to hear about. Yeah.
Hopefully this is easy enough for you. A couple of weeks ago, I was coming out of the county building, and a guy stopped me and says, I'm telling everybody I can tell. All you have to do to get your water rights is go to Coeur d'Alene to the Department of Water Resources building next to the Social Security office. Go in, talk to them, 30 minutes later you'll walk out with a paper in your hand for your water rights. I can't verify that. How about you tell me?
So I agree with all that except the last part. You're not going to walk out there with the water right in your hands. But the answer to most questions about what do I do about my water rights is contact the Idaho Department of Water Resources, make an appointment and go in and see them. And what's going to happen is you're going to sit down with the agent, you're going to tell them your situation, and they're either going to say, yep, you need to file a claim because you've got this use and it's been there this long, or I looked it up on the computer, because they can look it right up on your legal description, and boom, there's a water right. What you may walk out with is a copy of a claim that you just filed in the adjudication, or a receipt for that. You may walk out with that. The other thing that can happen, and it's also very valuable, is you sit down with them and say, you've been using that water out of Lake Ponderay since 1988, but you don't have a water right because you need to file for a permit. And here's the application for permit, fill that out, bring it back and pay the fee, whatever it is, and it'll go through the advertising in the paper and nobody protests it, you'll get that permit granted. You won't have to go through the adjudication because it's a newer water right, but that's really valuable for folks that don't know that they need a water right and they've been using water for a long time. So one of those two things can happen, and there's been a huge increase in the number of water rights applied for because of the adjudication of people thinking they had a water right, went in to file a claim and being told actually you need to file a permit to get a new water right. You don't have an existing water right.
So it's gotten a lot easier over the last few years than it used to be, right?
Well,
I mean,
there's more awareness because of the adjudication. It's not easier. It's the same process. There's just a lot more awareness now because of the adjudication. So.
Okay.
So there are areas that have not chosen to go through the adjudication process, and folks that, I know that doesn't necessarily apply here, but like maybe up in Boundary County, for example. So if somebody owns property and their area has not gone through the adjudication process, that doesn't mean they don't have water rights on their own property. It just means, right, am I getting this correct?
You're correct.
That in the event of a dispute, then you would have to go to court and kind of duke that out, whereas the adjudication process is kind of duking it out on the front end instead of on the back end. Do I kind of have that correct?
Yeah, so Basin 98, the Kootenai River Basin, is the only basin hydrologic unit in the state that will not have been adjudicated. It doesn't mean they don't have water rights. There are large water rights on the Kootenai River. The way it works is what I talked about, where you go in and you get a water right from the department, you get a permit granted. That gives you the opportunity, like a permit to go hunt the bear. It doesn't guarantee you a bear, but it gives you the opportunity to bag the bear. You bag the bear, tag it. Same with this. This gives you an opportunity to develop the water for whatever the permit said you can do it for. In this case, it's been out there for a while, so it's easy to show the department, hey, I've done this. And then they grant what's called a license. And when the license is granted, that is final. That is your water right. Now, if an adjudication comes along, you need to file your water right claim and say, look, I've got a license, and it's going to be easy to get your water right decreed because it's already been confirmed through the license. So there's a lot of those license rights up there in the Kootenai Basin. There's nothing that prevents people from showing that they have water rights or in the department's records. You can look it up. It just hasn't been adjudicated. It hasn't had that court stamp on it, but the department has confirmed it. What's hard are these, I've been using water out there since 1958, and there's never been a permit filed because permits weren't required back then. There's no license issued. So that decree becomes really valuable because then you confirm the use in a decree. That's some of what they have up there, that there's no piece of paper to prove that. The other part of adjudication that has proven to be valuable is these latent federal claims that are just floating out there, and the federal government claims they have the right to this water. They're forced to come into adjudication. You don't get to sue the king without the king's permission, right? How many of you have successfully sued the United States government? If you're in an
Actually, I have.
okay, well, good for you. If you're in an adjudication, Congress has waived sovereign immunity and forced them to come into the adjudication in a state court in Idaho, requires them to file their claims, whatever they are, with the deadline, and then the court decides if they have or don't have what they think they have. And in most cases, they take a pretty huge haircut from what they think they have. A lot of times things are negotiated out. Well, that cloud's maybe not a big cloud in Boundary County and the Kootenai River Basin, but there's a little bit of a cloud that'll still be there, that'll be resolved in all other parts of the state. We're going through that in Coeur d'Alene right now. It's painful, but they're going to be resolved. So I hope that
Norm,
helps.
one of the things that our community has addressed a question on is this water rights requirement really a step towards the government wanting to put meters on individual wells? Because I know that has come up with some people where, there's benefits to actually looking at what wells are producing, but that's been a question that I've been asked is Is that really the direction that we're going?
Yeah, is this just a precursor to doing something dramatic? So, for those of you that like to read statutes, read Idaho Code Section 7-701. 7-701. The Department of Water Resources already has full authority to require anybody to put a measuring device on any water diversion that he wants to at any time. He doesn't do it very often, but that authority already exists, and it's not dependent on adjudication. So that's number one. If you want a black helicopter, look for it in 7701, because that's where it's at. Number two, if you think that the Department of Water Resources doesn't know where your well is already, no. There are such, every time, have you ever dealt with a well driller? Well driller pulls a well permit, and there's a tag, there's a log, a well drilling log. All that's in the department's records. All that's filed with the department. So they don't need adjudication to know what your wells, where your wells are. There's no nefarious purpose right now. I can't tell you what a director or a governor or a legislature might want to do 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, but adjudication is not a precursor or requirement, from my experience, to do anything other than to know where people's water rates are, and if there's a need for active administration of water rights during times of shortage, which I don't know that that'll ever happen here, but it happens in Southern Idaho. You cannot administer something that you don't understand and isn't defined. So they do, the department, have a catalog of all the water rights. They know during times of shortage that if they need to shut off the junior rights, which is what our Constitution requires, that's a little easier to do, and they can put them in organized water districts after they're adjudicated. I don't know if that'll be a big issue up here. Yeah.
What if you're on a community well?
What if you're on a community well? Who owns the community well? Whoever owns a community well has to file the claim. It's like if you're in a city and it's a city-owned system, or you're in an irrigation district like East Green Acres Irrigation District, although that's a bad example because the Bureau of Reclamation actually owns that. The entity that owns the overall water right that serves the community, they file the claim. You don't need to worry about filing the claim.
Mine's not water like that water, our water around here. I just wanted to know, and I get a lot of people that still come through the gas station asking about the smelter. Is that done, gone away?
So the smelter has been built. We're talking about the Newport smelter.
Yes.
The smelter has been built in Tennessee. So I don't think it's coming. I think it's coming here.
Thank you for your hard work on that and other various things, Camp Bay, the RV park, all the other things.
You bet. And I'm happy to talk about any of those things and any other things you have when we adjourn here. My time is up for sure.
For sure.
Oh, just a really short thing. Okay, so two things. One is, if we live next door to the Forest Service, and we've been there since 1978, and we did fill out our water right, but have nothing back. From what I heard, you said we won't get anything till 2025.
Are you in base 97?
Pardon me?
97?
No, we're in Bonner County.
But by Priest or by Ponderay, which close?
We're a third of the way up. We're by the Falls Tavern at 8.5 miles.
Yeah, you're probably not going to see anything till later this decade, but you shouldn't have heard
He said
anything
later,
back
like
then.
it's
Out
gonna
of
be this
there have been 7,000 claims filed in those two basins, and they have preliminarily investigated 134 of them. So they have to go through all of that. They're going to evaluate it. Then they're going to contact you with what's called a preliminary recommendation or a notice of error process, where you can look at it and say, yeah, this is great, or no, I think there's a mistake. You're going to get a chance to talk to the department, and then they will issue the recommendation to the court, and you decide if you like it or need to object. Vast majority of these, I know there's going to be like 2024 or 2025 or beyond, when you get that recommendation, the director's report, it's mailed to you, and there's an objection period on that. After that objection period's over and nobody's objected because you're the only one that cares and they did it right, 120 days later, the court has a hearing on all of the unobjected to water rights and says, all right, I'm granting all of these, and then they'll mail you a decree. So it's going to be a while out, but the fact you're not hearing anything is actually good. If they're investigating your claim and they have questions, like, you said that you've been doing this since 1952, we're seeing a tax record for this house here in 1958. do you have more evidence to support the earlier date? And you'll probably say, well, that was just what I heard, but if that's what you have, then 58 is good enough. You know, that kind of contact maybe from the department you're gonna see here in the next couple of years.
So we're not gonna have to worry about the fence because they own the property next door.
They're gonna file their own stuff, and I would care, but, the Attorney General's gonna object to all of that, and like I said, there's gonna be, if you're interested in that, let me know, but there's some groups that are focused on being involved in that. The other thing I will tell you is, the department should be able to help you. If things get complicated, squirrely, they're not doing what you think they should do, don't call a lawyer. I mean, you can, but you wanna talk to somebody like Brian Donkey back here, because a water rate consultant can really help you with, here's what the department's trying to figure out. It's a technical issue usually. And then only as a last resort, if you're into, I gotta file an objection or whatever, then you worry about having a lawyer. But it's gonna be less than 1% of you that have that. And I can say that with confidence because in the Coeur d'Alene adjudication, it's literally been less than 1% who have had contested subcases that had to go through the court system. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.